Hey, everybody. Patrick Varano here. I'm the CEO of Emory Leadership Group, as well as the host of the podcast, Learning from Leaders. And on today's episode, what I wanted to talk about was intolerance. And I wanted to talk about it from two perspectives of really some things that I've observed with the companies that I've worked with, what I've observed just in the community. And that's around isolation and idleness and how they have, I think, really contributed strongly to our level of intolerance. And starting off talking about isolation, right? We started this off over 18 months ago in regards to being isolated, lockdowns, which were much more obviously severe than we're in right now. But what I believe that they did was they started us down this path of limiting our exposure to other people. We became isolated. We then went from maybe isolation just in regards to our families to bubbles. We created these bubbles where we felt, okay, this family in the neighborhood and this family and maybe this one will all agree that we will get together, and we'll sort of extend our network. But if you think about it, who did you probably set up a bubble with? People that were like-minded, that were just like you. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind. And then as we moved out from the bubbles, we then sort of started to see things open up more in regards to the communities, right? We went from, being able to be in restaurants now. And then we went to being able to maybe be unmasked in different scenarios. And now we're in this state of going back to work, remote workers and organizations trying to set back to work policies. I was just having this conversation with another group yesterday, and it was talking about what are they going to do in regards to vaccinations and, if we're vaccinated, are we still going to require masks when we're in meetings and in small groups? And I would argue that that still creates isolation for us. And I'm not here to argue whether you wear a mask or don't wear a mask, is simply to say that when we're covering our faces all of the time, when only our eyes are showing, there's still a barrier there. There's still isolation in terms of, maybe not to the degree that it was when we were in lockdowns, but we're still isolated from each other. There's still a barrier there between us, even within an organization when we're wearing masks. In a sense, we're isolating just in a smaller area because we're saying, I can't get too close to you. You can't get too close to me. I can't let my face down or my mask down so you can see my face when we're in a group. I remain isolated. And we know how important it is for babies in terms of recognizing faces, how social cues come from that. They read emotions more earlier than they are able to identify objects. They start identifying faces. And when we walk around with masks on, we really miss that opportunity to be able to connect with people. So from there, we talk about the idleness component of this. And I'll talk about each of these first and then go into how I think it really has played into our level of intolerance toward each other. So many people that have been now working remotely at home, if you haven't done that before, my guess is, especially when this started out 18 months ago, what were people doing? They weren't working all the time. I've been working from home for almost 30 years now. Fortunately, I get to leave every so often, but I've been working in a home office for 30 years. And even still, I get distracted, even with a routine of doing different things. So there's downtime, different than when you're in an office. There's less structured time. So what were people doing is I'm isolated and I'm listening to updates in the news. Maybe I've got my station that I'm watching, whatever that might be, conservative, liberal, somewhere in the middle, but I'm consuming my news from one source, and maybe it's playing in the background, and I'm hearing the same stuff all the time because I'm pretty sure that nobody's out there saying, okay, I'm going to listen to Fox in the morning and I'll listen to CNN in the afternoon. You're consuming one station. And because of that, that idleness, when we were in work settings or we weren't dealing with isolation the way that we do, we had better routines. We did other things. Idleness really has created an environment where we've limited the amount of things that we're doing and we consume more things in regards to news around us. Maybe less so than when we first started, but certainly still more than we would have if we were simply going to work every day in a regular work environment. And because of that, it creates a narrative that we create when we couple that with isolation, right? The groups, the bubbles that we would hang around, we probably all were consuming the same media information. So what did we do? We all started to draw the same opinions and conclusions about what was going on and what needed to happen and who wasn't doing what and all of these things. But it's because of isolation and our idolism or idleness that caused that. Now, there's an interesting study that was done, and I use this in some of the work that I will do around anxiety for groups or navigating stress and resilience. And it was a study that was published in Science magazine back in 2010. And it was the two authors on this were Harvard researchers. One was Dan Gilbert, and the other was Matt Killingsworth, I believe. And what they did was they actually surveyed, I think it was about 2,250 individuals. And what they did was they used cell phones and they would randomly text the individuals and they would ask them three questions that the person that was being texted would have to answer. One was, how are you feeling right now? So the person that received the text would say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, whatever they're feeling at the moment. It would then ask them, what are you doing right now? And then the last question is, it would ask them, is what you're thinking about and what you're doing the same thing? And what they found was that almost 47% of the time, 46.9% of the time, that what people were thinking about and what they were doing was not the same thing. What was more interesting is that those that were wandering, their minds were wandering, reported to be less happy than the group that was focused on what they were doing, right? And this had a pretty significant p-value, which tells the statistical significance of this. So it was relevant. It's interesting, right? Here we are. The more idle we are, the more unhappy we potentially can be because our minds wander. So in work, again, if we're not in a structured environment where we're going to work, this is what I'm doing, I'm at my desk, I've got my routine, right? Those things were all upended for most people. And because of that, I do believe that what started to happen is that our minds wandered more. And it probably wasn't to the positive stuff because we know how our minds work is that oftentimes we look for the negatives. And that goes back a lot to our amygdalas and the way we were structured to be able to survive is that we had to look around and say, what are our threats? What are the things around us that potentially could end my life? So those are the things we focus on. And in this environment, I think it's pretty clear we're probably done the same thing. And how that has created, really, it's just fed this sort of multi or less than a multi-dimensional aspect of what's going on. I believe isolation and idleness has often turned us into not a three-dimensional world, but a two-dimensional world. So finally, when we come to looking at, well, how does this really create intolerance? Well, if we think about it from the standpoint of the people that we are around most often, right? If I'm around people and we all share the same viewpoint and I'm consuming the same news more so than I ever did before, then I start to build a narrative and we start to develop groupthink, which is a well-known phenomenon. We begin to think the same way. And if we're isolated, these are the only people that we hang around with, right? These are the people that we have contact with. So if it's outside of what the belief is of our group, what do? Well, you're wrong. Your group is wrong. We're right. And I validate that I'm right by the news that I've listened to and the opinions of the people around me, because we all very much share the same opinions, our bubbles, right? We all share the same things. And we see this now, right? And what's interesting to me is that we know so much about unconscious biases. Well, to me, it's as though unconscious biases have been injected with steroids over the last 18 months. And again, I believe it's because of isolation and idleness that our own unconscious biases, things around confirmation bias, where we only look to the evidence that's going to back up why our opinions are right. Well, if my group is small, if we all share the same things, because I guarantee you, I'm not sharing a bubble with somebody. If I believe in masking and vaccination, I'm not sharing a bubble with somebody that believes masks are useless and they're not getting the vaccine, and vice versa. So we're all around people that are similar to ourselves. That creates an intolerance. And I would say it's been elevated even more to, we hear in organizations today the conversation around psychological safety, right? And psychological safety is the belief that we can have open dialogue and challenge each other in ways that I don't feel as though I'm threatened by doing that. It's a safe environment for me to do that, for us to have productive conflict. But if we are isolated and we only consume certain pieces of information, what starts to happen? We label people, right? We've gone from an environment where maybe it wasn't listening to understand, but maybe it was at least listening to respond. And now we've gone to, we listen to undermine people. I only listen to you enough to tell you how dumb you are, or you're selfish, or, you're this type of person, and it backfires. I think isolation has created an environment where, when we're not around people enough, we only see the dimension, that two dimension of somebody, what they post, right? Or what we know their beliefs are. But when we were around people, if we think back 18 months, we probably had people that had politically different views than us that we still got along with, that we liked, because they were multi-dimensional individuals. Yeah, they might have a political stance here, but they weren't just defined by that. They were other people. They weren't just defined by whether they got a vaccine or didn't get a vaccine, or they wear a mask or they don't wear a mask. And really today, because of isolation and idleness, I believe that we've created a binary environment that you're one or the other, and we're not. We're multi-dimensional individuals. And I think the more we can get away from isolation and spend more time with each other without the barriers, right? We're going to start to realize that, yeah, we might disagree on this, but there are so many other things that we do agree on, or who you are outside of this. We're very compatible. We don't have that when we're isolated, or when we only see things from a certain perspective. It can't happen. So that's how I've really looked at this, is that isolation and idleness really have created this intolerance, that we feel, and I'm guilty of it at times too. So what do we do about it? Well, again, I think our efforts to try and break down these barriers to share more time with people is going to be vitally important. And in regards to the idleness, is to, if you can't shut off the news, challenge yourself to try and look at different perspectives, different viewpoints, and be open, be curious to, maybe there is a somewhere in the middle, there probably is reality. And when we sort of move out of our own groups and look to how other people might be um, interpreting certain things, we might get a different perspective. Now, from a standpoint of cables, which is a model that I use around behaviors, each one of those behaviors can help in terms of developing relationships or repairing relationships as we move forward. The first in the cables model is around congruence, walking the talk. Is what I say and what I do the same thing? Respect. We probably all want respect. Do I respect the other person the way that I'm demanding respect of them? Asking these hard questions. How am I being perceived? Am I walking the talk? Is what I expect of others what I'm also providing them as well? I know for myself, when I take a deep dive on that, oftentimes when there are problems, I'm probably not doing that. The next is around appreciation. And this is about recognizing people for who they are and for what they do. So recognizing them for who they are is around diversity, right? To realize that we need different viewpoints. That's what challenges us, right? If we all shared the same point of view, the same beliefs, we probably would self-destruct much earlier because we wouldn't have people to question that maybe this isn't the right path. Maybe we should look at different options. There's a balancing effect that we can have there. And recognizing people for what they do also, for the contributions that they make. The next of the behaviors in this cables model is the B, and that's around belongingness, creating inclusion. We need that, right? When we are isolated, what are we doing? We're creating small groups. We're not opening this thing up, right? And we need connection. We thrive on that. We are herd pack animals, however you want to look at it. We need each other. The next is around listening as a behavior, and not just listening with our ears, but really listening with our ears for tone of voice, for the words that somebody uses, for their expressions, listening with our eyes, body language, facial expressions. Those things are important. And when we listen with both of those, it requires a lot of effort to truly listen to somebody with all of those. The next, we listen from a standpoint of our mind or curiosity, is an opportunity to slow things down. This is where we try and get away from our biases. I'm going to listen to you from a standpoint of curiosity. Why do you hold the views that you do? What is it about this that you're concerned about? But truly listening. And when we do that, we can often find what the concerns really are because people open up more. They trust that we're intent on listening to them. And the last part of listening that we talk about is listening from the heart or listening with empathy. And that's really about listening to somebody the way you would want to be listened to if you were the one that was talking or had a problem or a concern. When we listen with all four of those, we really activate what I believe is a superpower. And many things happen from that. I do a lot of work around productive conflict, and we talk about listening on all four of those levels. And when you do that, when you employ all four of those, you create a relationship, an open channel to discussing what the real concerns are. So after that, we talk about empathy by itself, how important that is. And it requires vulnerability for us to be empathetic to other people, right? Imagining what it's like to be in their shoes, to go through what they're going through, to look and say, if I was them, how would I want to be treated in this situation? It's very difficult for us to do, but vitally important, for especially from any leadership role that you might have, whether it's a titled leadership role or just a community or acting as a leader in your own household. The lastly is around specifics or clear expectations. It's setting boundaries. What do we need from each other? What do we expect from each other? And then holding each other to that in terms of ownership or accountability. When we do that, when we behave in those cables that we talked about in that analogy just now, or that acronym, we build stronger relationship bridges. We all have that ability, and quite frankly, we need that. That's how we start to build this environment of we become more tolerant of other people, even if there is going to be more isolation, or more certainly than we had before 18 months. And it forces us to get out of our idleness. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you're able to go out there and maybe try and look at things differently. How does your own isolation impact how some of your relationships have been? Are there people out there that you really have been less tolerant about because you've only seen them from one dimension, other than the three-dimensional person that they are? So hopefully this will challenge you to do that. Until the next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best.